Morning, everybody. I'm Moira from Business in the Community Ireland. Welcome to hundreds of you joining us today. We are so excited for this hour ahead of inspirational conversation. But before we start, I just want to take 3 minutes and tell you about what we're up to at Business in the Community Ireland. First of all, this event, as you can see, is fully accessible. Live captioning is being provided by My Clear Text, and we'll send their information in a follow-up email, because we definitely want to make our events more accessible to people with disabilities, and we'd encourage you to do the same. So what have we been up to at Business in the Community Ireland? If you don't know who we are, our mission is to inspire and enable businesses to bring about a low carbon economy and an inclusive society where everybody thrives. As you can see, we are the only network dedicated to sustainability in the country, and we are 103 members strong and growing all the time. If you're not a member, come join us. We celebrate 20 years this year, and it has been probably one of the busiest years we have ever faced in our lifetime, because sustainability has hit the mainstream. The members we work with, well, they know us because we help them on strategy and leadership and reporting and new sustainability trends, or they might be going for the Business Working Responsibly mark, our certified standard for sustainability. But some of you might know us from our work on the Low Carbon Pledge, a collective action to tackle climate change. Well, watch this space. In spring 2021, we'll be announcing new ramped up ambitions around that pledge. Some of you might also know us from our work on matching businesses with schools around the country. We can't have a fair and inclusive society if we leave young people behind. 40,000 students have gone through that programme, and we've opened up the world of work to them. In fact, just 2 days ago, a student who had participated in one of our programmes, she went to school in inner city Dublin. She's now studying medicine in Trinity. And she wrote to us and said, "Your dreams and potential are not limited by your postcode." Others of you might know us from our diversity and inclusion programs. We help people from ethnic minorities, persons with disabilities, people who've suffered homelessness. How do we level the playing field for them and get them into your workforces and unleash that untapped talent pool? Well, again, watch this space. In the first half of 2021, we'll be announcing a new ambitious pledge to move the dial on authentic diversity and inclusion. But what we all know is no one company can fix climate change. No one company can tackle diversity and inclusion. It takes courage, it takes leadership, and crucially, it takes collaboration. That really sums up our belief for the last 2 decades at Business in the Community Ireland. And I think those 3 words sum up the incredible speakers we have for you today. We have been chasing Paul Polman to speak at one of our events for years. I call him the godfather of sustainability. Caroline Casey, you made this happen, and I want to thank you so much. And I can't wait to talk to you and Paul later on about your leadership in moving the dial on inclusion. So without further delay, let's dive straight into it in conversation with Paul Polman and our CEO, Tomás Sercovich. See you later. Thanks, Tomás.
Thanks so much, Maura, and good morning, everybody. Paul, if you want to switch on your camera, and can I say what a pleasure it is to be here this morning. Just a couple of things before we start. There is a hashtag out there, CEO as activist, for those of you who are active on the world of social media. We have quite a packed agenda. I'm going to be having the privilege of kicking off this conversation, which will be followed by a second and a third conversation involving Anne O'Leary, CEO of Vodafone Ireland, and our colleague Maura Horgan with Caroline Casey, a social activist that is very well known and is now leading the Valuable 500. So because of this packed agenda, we won't take questions from the Q&A, but please, if there's any comments you would like to send to us, you can use that the Q&A function. And as I was saying, the CEO as activist is there for you. As Maura was saying, it is an incredible pleasure to have this session going on this morning. Had it not been for COVID, we would have been in the same room with a group of people that inspire us and inform us and challenge us, and that's what we do every year with our CEO Breakfast Forum. But also thanks to COVID, we have the opportunity of bringing more than just the CEOs of our member companies and having a much broader constituency for this great conversation. So my suggestion is that you sit down, relax, enjoy the next hour. I know there's webinar fatigue, so switch off other devices and just enjoy the conversation. Hopefully you have a nice cup of tea in front of you. And just talking about tea, Paul, I need to start this session by ascertaining your Irish credentials, because that's very important for our audience this morning. So I know that you looked after a company that owns more than 400 brands, operates in close to 200 countries. So a big responsibility, I'm sure, but one of those responsibilities was minding one of Ireland's most loved tea brands, Lyons Tea. So did you really feel the burden of responsibility of minding a brand that's so iconic and essential for Irish households?
Well, thanks, Thomas and Moira, obviously, and thanks for the opportunity. And you can imagine that as the global CEO of Unilever, about 95% of my time was spent looking after the Lyons brand in Ireland to be sure that that was being well managed. But my brother-in-law is actually from County Clare, so County Clare, I apologize, County Clare. So we have a fair amount of Irish in the family, and the Dubliners came into the family already before Ireland was nearly born. One of his brothers plays for the band. And in order to join our family, he had to swallow the berry and start drinking Lyons tea, which he did. But I was actually interested to see the other day in the newspapers how high the emotions are running in Ireland, that even a Cork politician, Billy Kelleher, was actually threatening to fire some of his staff because they had brought Lyons into the office. So I don't know much about how far that goes in Ireland, but it seems to evoke the emotions. What I like about tea, Unilever has a great tea business, and it's about 20% of the global tea market. But the reason I was interested in tea, at least when I was running Unilever, is it's actually an amazing brand to create employment in the emerging markets. If you give a farmer a 1 or 2 acre plot and educate them on sustainable farming, drought-resistant bushes, etc., you really can create a livelihood. So we brought back our tea plantations in Kenya, Tanzania, actually building one right now as we talk in Rwanda, and they provide livelihoods to 100,000 people or more, operate hospitals, schools. So for me, actually selling tea was a means to an end. And the end really was to lift people out of poverty. That's why we bought brands like Puka, T2, Tazo, or Pure Leaf, and so forth. Great opportunities actually to strengthen livelihoods, and doing it in a way that you make money so you can continue to do it is really what the purpose of business should be.
Absolutely, no, and it's great that you understand Irish politics and dynamics so quickly when it comes to tea. And in a sense, tea is also a means to an end in terms of all the conversations and the people it brings together. So it's a beautiful story. There are hundreds of videos if you go into YouTube and you search for Paul Polman sustainability or purpose, and there's one that I particularly like. Your son is interviewing you, Paul, and you have one line that has stuck in my head for years. You talk about business being one of the most influential institutions to drive change, and I really love that. And most people this morning will know about your journey, your stellar career, the sustainable living plan at Unilever. I'd like to ask you something quite personal, which is is there a particular day, is there a particular moment when you realized that this was going to be a real driver of change in your business? Was there a aha moment when you woke up and said, this has to change and this has to be different? What was the main trigger for you?
Yeah, first, Thomas, the video you're referring to is called Talk to Me. Ariana Huffington has a daughter, and she actually befriended my son. They're both living in Soho. And they said, you know, you guys are actually human beings, but people don't know you. You're so far removed as CEOs. You have this aura around you, and it's time that we all become human. So she started this very successful series where Oprah Winfrey or Richard Branson or Ariana Huffington was interviewing, being interviewed by their children. And so not surprisingly, she asked my son to interview me, and my son refused. He didn't want to have anything to do with it, nor be on television. But when he found out that one of the friends' benefits that came with it was cleaning his apartment in New York, he gladly agreed. And they were in for a surprise. I think it took him 2 days to clean it. But as a result, this interview was born. And we were not allowed to see the question, so it was entirely spontaneous. I think your life develops and with a certain level of serendipity, and it's difficult to really predict how it goes. I've always lived a little bit a life of creating opportunities and then picking the ones you want to pursue and do that with passion and energy. And that has so far worked for me. And in the area of business, I ended up in business, to be honest, by coincidence. I wanted to be a priest, then I wanted to be a doctor. And as both of these didn't work out for whatever reason, I ended up in business because my father made it very clear that at one point in time, I had to make a living by myself. But the longer I was actually in business and climbed up the corporate ladder, I discovered the enormous potential that business had to be a force for good. In most countries, or globally, if you look at it globally, business is 65% of the global GDP, 80% of the financing, 90% of the job creation. So it can be an enormous force of good. And many of the issues that we now talk, it would be pretentious to say that we were aware of them 20, 30 years ago, because frankly, the world was in a quite different state. But it was always clear to me, having grown up with nature, having been born after the Second World War, not too far after that, that we always had to be a bigger part of the community. We always had to work first and foremost for the common good. We always had to invest in others, knowing that by doing so, we would be better off ourselves as well. Think intergenerational. So these basic values that were given to me by my parents, I've always tried to live my life for that, not for ourselves or our own greeds or needs, but to really try to make this world a little bit of a better place. And as your life develops, you develop yourself, you grow yourself, and you go through certain crucibles that form you. I worked in Newcastle in the north of England, and that was for the first time that I saw second generation unemployment, with shipbuilding, coal, and steel having gone. And that left a lasting impression. When you see girls 13, 14 years old, the only thing they can get for themselves is to get pregnant, and actually making their situations more difficult. How do you lift a community out of its misery? Drugs, probably another big issue there. I was fortunate enough to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and we took 8 blind friends of mine from all over the world with us to the top, and spent 2 weeks together, and that was a life-changing experience. I unfortunately was in the Taj Mahal when it was attacked by terrorists, and we were there and started to appreciate life and experience the goodness of people more than anything else. So these are these life crucibles that I think form you. And one of the things that I've always felt as a role of business was important is to live in harmony with fellow citizens, but also planet nature, the planet itself. The services that we get from our natural capital are estimated to be $125 trillion. But because we don't pay for it, we squander it, and we squander it increasingly at a faster rate. And that is affecting lives, and that is affecting livelihoods, even more so seen with the COVID crisis that we have right now. And I've always felt, frankly, that we have a responsibility to live in harmony. In my career, I worked for Nestle as well and for Unilever, and the benefit of these companies were not only that the strong values that were there were in line with the values I believed in, so I could be myself and develop myself, but more importantly also, they did care about the bottom of the pyramid. And instead of producing for the poor, as some companies try to do to earn some money, these companies have a long history of investing in the countries and working with the poor. People like Prahalat, bottom of the pyramid, was a close mentor and has helped me a lot. So I've always felt this broader responsibility and have been able to work in environments where I could make that come alive. And it's very clear now, not surprisingly, that that is more needed than ever. I think COVID has shown us that there aren't, you can't have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. So we now need to be sure that we don't miss this opportunity, but design better as we move forward. And that's in the interest of everybody. And I believe actually in the biggest benefiter of that will be the private sector or the business community. Unilever, by running over the last 10 years, a business model when I was the CEO of decoupling our growth from environmental impact, maximizing our overall social impact, looking at multiple stakeholders longer term, we were able to get a growth and a return for the company that and for the shareholders that was in excess of what our competitors were doing, 300%. So it can be very, very profitable. And again, creating this better future moving forward, I think is also the most profitable opportunity that we have, but at the same time, creating more resilient, better jobs, better paying jobs that we desperately need as we move forward.
That's really interesting because obviously your experience has been able to demonstrate that we can put together sustainability values with profits, and I think that's very clearly demonstrated, and profits with growth. Yet, if we really think about some of the challenges that companies are looking when it comes to this very broad sustainability agenda, at some point we might say this is also very much about perhaps consuming less and changing our lifestyles. And the issue is, how do you turn that around in business when all we're used to in business is about growth and more sales and therefore more profits? But at the end of the day, and in many sectors, the solution should be about consuming less and selling less. So how do big businesses resolve those dilemmas?
Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. And that's obviously the ultimate crucial question. You cannot have unlimited growth on a finite planet. This year, Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day that we actually use up all the resources that the world can replenish, was August 22nd, which means that every day after that, we actually steal from the future. We steal from our children and their grandchildren. And not surprisingly, as you see that we've cut down half of the rainforests in the world. On climate change, we're projecting well over 3 degrees still, even despite COVID, may I say. In the oceans, we soon find ourselves with more plastic than fish. So the way we grow is definitely become unsustainable. And the reason for that obviously is that many of these things are tragedies of the commons because we don't put value on there. If you see that only 9% of the material that we use in this world is reused and the rest goes into landfills or incineration or oceans, that is very sad. What we need to move to is not only a circular economy, if you want to, but we are at the point that we now need a regenerative economy where we actually bring things back, where we return things to its state that it was previously. Otherwise, we cannot get there. So it is very much, as what you're saying, ultimately of producing less stuff and less resources. I work now in my new foundation, Imagine, for example, with the fashion industry. 64 companies are part of this coalition across the value chain. They're all doing wonderful work in their own rights, trying to get to sustainable fashion, to attack the issues of dyes, of labor standards, of not using fur, of having the people they use not having anorexia or being minors, and all these other things. Every fashion company will have a CSR report or a sustainability report and present something good. But because we're seeing population growth, middle class developing, the fast development of fast fashion, having now 52 seasons, in companies like Primark or Zara, the amount of clothes that we have and the demand for clothes go up significantly faster than these wonderful efforts are trying to mitigate the negative effects. And the result is that fashion alone is 46% of plastics in the ocean, 20% of the carbon budget that we have, labor standards that are still not acceptable to me. So ultimately, you need to address the question of how can we grow by using less resources. And then the most important answer to that, first and foremost, is to treasure what we measure. Currently, with things like GDP, we measure industrial output. We measure producing more weapons. So wars is a good thing. Having more chimneys put smoke out of there and producing more stuff is a good thing for GDP. So we need to start measuring quality of education, quality of air that we breathe, the clean water, the forests that we can enjoy. And the tragedy is what we now measure doesn't have these tragedies of the commons in. It doesn't account for that. It doesn't measure income inequality. So many people are starting to think of a broader definition of GDP, and translating that into companies. It also means a broader definition of capitalism by not only optimizing financial capital, but also social and environmental. The good thing now is that there are many efforts happening with GRI, CDP, IFRS, SASB, Accounting for Sustainability, with the Prince of Wales and the business in the community obviously closely involved in redefining and getting measures around environmental and social capital. When we do this, and sooner rather than later, I think we will also drive a different behavior. It's starting to happen already that companies know what needs to be done. Many are making climate commitments, for example. Increasingly, we also see the financial market moving in that direction, the consumers in this world or the citizens asking for that, your own employees. We now need to put the impetus behind scale and speed, and that can only come from changing our measuring systems and then working together with governments in this world individually and collectively to rapidly change the definition of success. The European Green Deal is obviously a great example of that, where you have the circular economy, the biodiversity, the farm to fork packages that go very much into that direction.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really interesting. Our president, who happens to be our patron, was recently talking about donut economics, and I think it was such a clear explanation of the challenges between the social and the environmental. But let me ask you about climate change for a second, because obviously it's about measurement, it's about values and vision and leadership. But I'm sure some CEOs this morning are listening to you and saying, well, that's the big global picture. I actually don't have time to be thinking about redefining GDP. I need to, make it to the end of the month. And we did some research recently on Scope 3 emissions, and we found that when it came to setting targets, not that many companies were on that journey yet. We know that there are conversations about potentially looking at mandatory legislation, pressure from the EU. You probably saw the Chancellor in Britain this week only announcing by 2025 requirements. What do you think is going to be the single most effective driver of action when it comes to the net zero? Because what I see is CEOs want to do things, but they feel somehow paralyzed, and they're waiting for others, and they just don't know where to look at first.
Well, the answer is somewhere in between, Thomas. I think that more and more people are aware. 90%, 95% of people know that climate change is a real issue and actually buy into the science. We just have a few politicians that try to deny it. Even in the US, the majority of people think climate change now is an issue that needs to be attacked. Interestingly, from all the studies that you do, the cost of attacking it is relatively minor, 1 to 1.5% of GDP. Now with COVID, we're already spending 15% of GDP just to stabilize our global economy, saving lives and livelihoods. And you could argue that many of the issues that we're now facing are a result of not attacking these burning issues in the first place. If we don't do that, that's not really an answer or an alternative. If the world keeps going on a trajectory even above 1.5 degrees, the cost would be significantly higher. In fact, on a 2% scenario or 2.5% scenario, we would incur cost of over 160 trillion already. If you look at some of the studies by the European Climate Foundation and others, and that is consistently confirmed. So we don't have a choice really. And then the question is, how do you do this? The reality is you can do a lot yourself, reducing your carbon footprint. Every company can reduce by probably 20% to 30% by just taking measures on energy conservation. But then the answer for the bigger changes has to come from working together. The reality that you paint is probably the right one. We have about $24 trillion of the global economy that has made climate pledges, but very few yet have signed up to the science-based targets, which is really ensuring that your value chain gets to net zero by 2050 so that we can stay below 1.5 degrees. That is not always well understood. Obviously, the major emitters are the fossil fuel companies, and despite some good announcements recently, none of the major fossil fuel companies have made commitments that are in line with the Paris Agreement. So let's not kid ourselves. The good thing now is that we start to see governments moving. The Chinese government has come in with a 2060 deadline, the UK government 2050, Europe with the Green Deal 2050, and by the way, increasing the decarbonization targets for between now and 2030. With Biden, we see the same happening in the US. Soon we will have the majority of the G7 countries with climate commitments. Japan, as you know, surprisingly, and South Korea also made commitments 2 weeks ago. So the direction is clear and the stakes are put in the ground. And businesses that start to anticipate that and understand that will actually be better. There are now enough studies out there, empirical studies and hard facts that show that businesses that have internalized the climate challenge are actually also more profitable and have a higher return and increasingly become more interesting for the financial community as well. This bifurcation in share performance you now see actually quite rapidly. Coming to specifically what companies can do, mandatory legislation will happen. Many of the recommendations of the Task Force for Financial Disclosure of Climate-Related Risk will become law, in my opinion. The reason is that voluntary actions alone will not be enough, and certainly not on the time scale that we have to address these issues. New Zealand has already put it in law. The UK, as you talk about, in fact, the Fed now in the US under Biden already, some people are making comments that they are looking at it, and I think you'll see acceleration in that area. What business can do, first and foremost, take responsibility of Scope 3. In Unilever, if I would have only done what is under my control, Scope 1 and 2, we only had 4 million tons of carbon, still a lot, but in the whole value chain, we had over 400 million tons on the deforestation, on the way people were using our products. So if I can cut 10% or 20% in my value chain, it's infinitely more than what I can do in my own operations. So many companies think that they can outsource the value chain and also outsource responsibility, and that simply doesn't work anymore. So you have to look at the total value chain and work together. And frankly, first of all, measuring your impact, which is where it starts, then reducing, obviously, that by many of the actions that people are now taking, and then putting a price on carbon, start with an internal price, actually will prepare you very well when we undoubtedly will have an external price. I know the Irish government is looking at this as well, and I certainly think that you should encourage that to ensure that you create that level playing field, but also attack these issues with speed and urgency that can only ultimately benefit the whole business sector at large.
Absolutely. No, and it's music to our ears to talk about science-based targets, because that is part of our collective action and where we want to go next. I'm going to stop here because I don't want to take over the whole session, and I would love to invite Anne O'Leary to join the virtual conversation and continue this journey. So can I thank you, Anne, for joining the panel of interviewers And thank you, Paul, for this so far. And I'll come back to everybody later. Thank you.
No, thank you, Thomas. The final thing I wanted to say, perhaps before Anne jumps in, and I look forward to that, is really use organizations like Business in the Community. It's one of the first organizations I joined when I moved to Newcastle, and the seeing is believing, and I still work very, very closely with the Prince of Wales, for whom I have a high respect. But with Business in the Community, you have a long history and expertise and a credibility, and in fact, quite some programs that you can join to help you attack these issues and how to go about. Because I recognize that many of the companies that are listening in are small and medium-sized enterprises, and they say, well, I don't have this whole organization behind me, and how do I get going, and what can I do? Be part of these organizations, just like that you hire some expertise sometimes in finance or accounting or in marketing or driving purpose in your business models. Here you have a great opportunity to do that as well by leveraging the resources of Business in the Community. And you are very blessed not only to have a long existence already, but also to have an enormous quality of people and programs there that you can benefit from.
Fantastic. No, that is true, and that's thanks to the great network of members we have, of which Anne is one of those representatives. So, Anne, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Hello, Paul. I'm absolutely delighted to meet you in person, albeit virtually. The first thing I just have to pick up on was Billy Kelleher from Cork and the Barry's tea and the Lion's tea, because I'm from Cork too, and I know Billy well. And I grew up with Barry's tea, so much so that wherever I travel, I bring my Barry's tea with me. However, in Dublin, we do see more Lion's tea, and I certainly can't fire any of my employees for drinking Barry's tea. But I also do drink your lovely Puka organic teas in the evening. So I thought that was very amusing. I'm well known for bringing my chargers, my tea, and my runners, no matter where I travel in the world.
Very good.
And obviously Paul as well, some of you might know, but our ex-CEO of Vodafone Group is on the Unilever board, and he would have worked very closely with Paul for many years. And so I've heard a lot about Paul, and I sometimes think the work that we've done on purpose and sustainability in Vodafone has largely been influenced, Paul, by you as well. So I really want to thank you for that. From a Vodafone perspective, we talk about connecting for a better future. You talked about that, building a better future. And we talk about our purpose, improving the lives of 1 billion people through under 3 pillars of the digital society and connectivity, diversity and inclusion, which is nobody left behind, and the planet piece. And I suppose that framework has helped focus us in different areas. And I'm very proud of the work we've done. And I'm also delighted with the other 35 CEOs and Business in the Community that we've become a voice in Ireland about change, about sustainability, and what we need to do as a combined leadership team and group. So I've been asked, Paul, to ask you on purpose and on leadership. So instead, in terms of purpose, what advice would you say to people that are listening here, whether at CEO level, at other level? How can companies put purpose at the center of their strategy and in a real and concrete way to engage staff and to build long-term sustainable value?
Yeah, so it's very important. In fact, to finish our tea stories, but not to dwell on it, Christiana Figueres is a lover of PG tips, and we shipped to her boxes and boxes during the COP21 negotiations in Paris. And she will say, as she has put in her book actually, that we would not have had a successful Paris Agreement, which the world still is holding on to, if it weren't for PG tips. But anyway, going to purpose, the most important thing is that you can do is, first of all, when you implement purpose, is go back to the roots of the company. Jim Collins talks about nurturing the core before you stimulate progress. When I came in as a CEO from the outside, I had to earn my respects, and I went back to the roots of the company, went back to Port Sunlight, to Lord Lever when he started it. And he was already quite a remarkable man talking about shared prosperity. He didn't build the business for the shareholders or to enrich themselves. He built his business, in that time bar soaps, to attack a burning issue in society, which is really the issue of hygiene, when at that time Victorian Britain, 1 out of 2 babies didn't make it either past year 1. So very purpose driven, and we had to bring that back. Over time, I think we lost our compass as well and started to react to the market and run these businesses on the shorter term. That's why when I came, stopped quarterly reporting, stopped giving guidance, moved the compensation systems to the longer term, just to create the space for companies like that to start to run your operations on a long-term multi-stakeholder model. It is building value through values. It is driving profits through purpose, not profits with purpose. For us, the shareholder returns are the result of what we did, not an objective in itself. And it has served us well, and more companies that understand that will do well. The first thing to do is to put it at the core of your operations. Many of us have it as a add-on. We call it CSR. But instead of CSR, corporate social responsibility, we need to become RSCs, responsible social corporations, and put it at the core of our company. In Unilever, it became the strategy. It was embedded in all of our brands. So if you move purpose from the periphery, if you want to the core, I think you'll go quite far. Colin Myers, in his book Prosperity, defines purpose as to profitably address the issues of people and planet. So what are the profitable issues that you are going to attack? If you do that, you redefine actually what your business opportunities are, and at the same time, you make your business more resilient. So it has 2 enormous advantages. In Unilever, our purpose became make sustainable living commonplace. It allowed us with credibility to decouple our growth from environmental impact, to increase our overall social impact. And more importantly, by putting this purpose in the brands, we actually created more opportunities. All of a sudden, a brand like Lifebuoy or Sunlight was there to help a child reach the age of 5, when 4 million children every year still die in parts of the world of infectious diseases. A brand like Domestos built toilets when still 1.5 billion people have to deal with the issues of open defecation. A brand like Dove building women's self-esteem when only 4% of women feel happy in the bodies that they're in. So all these purposes, these missions that we brought to the brand, resulted in these brands growing faster and being more profitable. And it's not surprising. You attract better people to work for you. Unilever became the #1 employer in most markets that we operate in. The people are more engaged. Our engagement scores were in the top tercile. The suppliers and your value chain become more resilient and better working relationships. And frankly, because you respond to the needs of society, your products and your innovations become more robust. All of that translates into a better performance ultimately. And that is putting purpose at the core of your business and driving a purpose-driven strategy. Hard work, not easy to do, but I think it's the only way for companies in the future to survive. Companies need to do 2 things to be successful long-term, I believe, irrespective of the size of the companies. First is to aspire to be a net positive company, not being less bad. CSR is fine, but it's 10% of the solutions and perhaps the first step. You really need to start thinking of how to become a regenerative or net positive company. And secondly, to participate in these broader systems changes. If you don't be an active part in changing the system that we operate in so that it is more sustainable, more equitable for everybody, then I think it's not going to work. So these are the 2 conditions I think that companies should be taking into account.
Paul, some amazing points there. Doing good and doing good business is what I often talk about. So the outputs of what you do will be the profitable revenue growth, etc., the engaged staff. but it's all the things you do, 1,000 small things I often talk about. And actually, Paul, during COVID, I saw it myself. We talk about to connect for a better future, keeping Ireland connected. That purpose really stood up during COVID because people worked 24/7 to keep hospitals connected, to keep frontline staff connected, to keep, increasing the capacity on the network, because what we did was never so important as people worked from home and worked remotely. So I can see exactly how purpose can come to life and make you more resilient in times of crisis. So you give some great examples, and we're seeing it as well in attracting talent, attracting people actually from graduate to senior level. It's not, just the reward package. It's actually, what are you about? What is this going to do for me? Is this going to be a motivating, inspiring company every day for me? So thank you for that. So a very 35 CEOs here listening in who are leading the Charter on Sustainability, and we've signed up to it and we're being that voice. What key advice would you say to those Irish CEOs, in terms of bravery and courageous? Now, I think it's probably easier, Paul, than 10 years ago, maybe when you started, when they were saying, what is he talking about? I think more people are on board. But what would you say to us in terms of what we need to do from a leadership perspective?
Well, first and foremost, you're here as citizens of planet Earth, and you have a responsibility to ensure that we protect it now and for future generations to come. We've done more damage in the last 40 years to this planet. We've lost 68% of all living species, in some parts of the world even more. And that in 40 years versus a nearly 5 trillion year experience. What gives us the right to do this? 5 billion, sorry. What gives us the right to do this? So we need to be responsible citizens and have a moral obligation. But as you rightfully say, Anne, we now have far more evidence, hard facts, that it is also better to run your business that way. And companies that do are more profitable, ultimately give higher shareholder return over the longer term, and actually are better prepared for the future. Ultimately, we do have all the answers. We actually never have been so forewarned about what is going to happen, and so forearmed with the tools to do something about it. And yet collectively, we are failing. One of the reasons is that we're operating in boundaries that drive our behavior, and we need to spend more time on moving these boundaries. For example, moving the financial markets to the longer term would be providing space. Putting value on environmental and social capital would be providing more space. So be actively the CEOs that work on the forest versus in the forest once you've passed this higher point of moral compass. And then the second thing, it is actually human willpower that is needed. We know what needs to be done, yet collectively we are still failing. And I think it boils down to our individual and collective leadership. The average tenure of a CEO has dropped to below 4.5 years. The behavior of many CEOs is still geared towards the shareholders only. If you really look at the facts, the boards are adding an extra portion to that. So we need to change our leadership, and we need to change our leadership behavior. And really what we need there is bring humanity back, in my opinion. We've distilled everything to computer trading, to spreadsheets, to numbers, to cost optimizing. And at the end of the day, first and foremost, we are human beings. The leaders that have done well during COVID, that are running their companies well, operate with a high level of humanity and humility. They're also more purpose-driven. They know how to work in partnership. Many of the issues, as you've alluded to, we cannot do alone. They think intergenerational. And these are the type of leaders that we need. I always call it courage. And courage actually comes from the French word cœur, which is the heart. So you need to lead both with the heart and the brain. And the leaders that understand that putting the interest of others ahead of your own, and by doing so, you're better off yourself as well, will be the leaders that will be successful in the future. And those are the leaders that I think will attract the followers that you obviously need to change the systems.
Thank you so much for that. I will assure you that the leaders that you're speaking today, we are courageous. and we have heart and brain, and we will continue to lead with humility and humanity. So some wonderful tips for us, and I really appreciate, and hopefully I'll get to meet you face to face someday. Thank you so much for listening. And Moira, I'll hand over to you.
Anne, thanks so much. Thanks a million, you're a star. And Anne, to point out, is a member of our leaders group on sustainability, a subgroup of our members working on big solutions for us. I am so thrilled to see you again, Caroline Casey. Caroline Casey is the founder and CEO of the Valuable 500. I had the privilege, I think it's a year to the day, Caroline, I interviewed you on stage on a dark November morning in the Mansion House in front of 200 CEOs, and you just stormed the stage. I know you inspired many people, and it was through you and through your wonderful chairperson, Paul Polman, that today is possible. So Valuable 500, Caroline, for those who don't know, tell us what it is, how has the year been for you, and are Irish companies getting involved with the incredible initiative you've undertaken?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me back. There's nothing better and more exciting than to report good news. So I just want to start by saying the Valuable 500 began as a campaign to ensure that disability was equally included on the leadership agenda. It works to a stat that 90% of our companies claim to be committed to diversity and inclusion, and only 4% consider disability. 54% of our leaders have never had a conversation about disability. So our challenge is, how can a company be inclusive? It's leaving 15% of our global population out of the business value chain. Now, to change that, we believe, like Paul, inclusive business creates inclusive societies. To create inclusive business, we need inclusive leaders like Paul. And so the Valuable 500 began as a campaign to get 500 Paul Polmans and their companies to help us break that circuit about leadership and disability. However, today, I'm delighted to say I come back with 340 global companies and CEOs, which represents 12 million employees, 31 countries, 4.5 trillion in revenue, and over 40 sectors. And what that also has done, it has created an extraordinary opportunity for us to create phase 2. And what we will be doing in the new year is announcing with the World Economic Forum and the Nippon Foundation, the phase 2, which will be activating this community on 6 pillars around how we can drive system change, sharing together the multiplier effect across industry and across the maturity journey. And lastly, to say to you, of your leaders group, of which you've 35, 11 of your leaders and CEOs have joined the Valuable 500 so far, led by yourselves, thank you, and Patrick Coveney. But there's going to be a further opportunity because the Valuable 500 will shut at the end of January. We only have 160 seats left. And in a way, I wanted Ireland to be the cherry on the cake. This work started and began in Ireland with Irish industry and Dermot Desmond, who backed me a long, long time ago. And I suppose in a way, I wanted to come back and say, Ireland, let's complete this. So in January, hopefully, with all going well, Paul will be coming over to invite what we believe is the last 50 CEOs from Ireland into our community.
That's fantastic. And let's lead out on this agenda. Paul, you're the chairperson of the Valuable 500. You're quite a busy person, but you were the first leader to stand up and really embrace this agenda with Caroline. Why? You know, you have enough balls in the air. Why take on this as well as everything else?
Well, first of all, Caroline is an enormous force of nature, and you have that from your own home territory. So you'd be daft not to support her. But more importantly, it goes back to basic human values for which I fight, which is the same as for why I fight for gender equality or for the LGBT community. The world cannot exist if we don't have dignity and respect and equitable opportunities for everybody. And anytime these basic values are being violated, we need to stand up and fight for that. Just like American CEOs did when Trump made the comments in Charlottesville, or when we stand up with Black Lives Matter. Now it's complex and sometimes we fail and we need some crisis to make us realize that. But here you have an enormous group of people, 1.3 billion, as Caroline said, enormous spending power, you'd be daft not to include that into your business plans. And for any CEO, I would say very simply, if a CEO would say, yeah, it's important for me to have gender equality, but disregards minorities or disregards the LGBT community, it doesn't fly, because people will say you're not genuine. You're not genuine. You commit the same crime, basically, because it is a crime against humanity. You commit the same crime as what you did before. So it is tough, but you need to be totally inclusive. We met under bizarre circumstances in Colombia, which I still don't believe, but Caroline will leave that for another
That's a story for a cup of tea or coffee.
But I happen to have I mentioned I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro with 8 blind people, the first African blind person, Douglas Sidiales at the top. So we started a foundation, my wife and myself, in Africa, and we have 26,000 blind children in school now that we support, and it has grown into a foundation to be in 6 countries and operating from Kenya. So I have a special soft spot, if you want to, for people with visual impairment, and obviously Caroline falls into that category. So that probably was my soft spot, why I said I'll be happy to be the chair of this wonderful organization. And interestingly, what is actually happening despite COVID, she's able to attract more companies to join at a faster pace than before, which is a very good sign. It shows that the S in ESG, environmental, social, and governance, is coming forward. But companies need help there. There are a lot of myths about this, people with disability. You need to have companies prepared so that that culture is right. How do you do the integration? And this is where Caroline obviously can provide the expertise, and with organizations like Business in the Community, again, once more, you can help companies just be so much better for it. And what we find once more, again, the numbers or your success as a company would be better. You know, in your company, you probably have more people already with disabilities, and certainly with the potential to have a disability, than you think. And if all these people are right now working for you and thinking that you don't care, think about the trapped energy, the trapped potential that is locked up.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And we've been running diversity and inclusion programs for 20 years. And as I was saying to you, Caroline, it's probably been the busiest year we've ever had. Although many of our clients from ethnic minorities and persons with disabilities are massively underemployed or unemployed. 80% of people with sight loss are unemployed in this country, Caroline, you know far too well. And I loved what Paul said, you have to treasure what you measure. I just thought that was such a sentence that, like, a tweetable moment, as Oprah would say. We're launching a new pledge next year because, you know, Caroline, I know we're sick of talking about diversity and inclusion, and the dial is not moving enough. Now, we focus on employment and access for young people as well to those jobs of the future. With the last few minutes we have, what's your top tips, both of you actually, to get CEOs, because CEOs have to sign this pledge, a bit like our low carbon pledge. How do you get them to finally put this on the agenda? We want them to measure, we want to report, and we want them to set targets, because it's not moving fast enough. And also, as you often say, there's almost like a jockeying order of pitching diversity and inclusion and hierarchy. What can we do?
For me, for starters, the most important thing is around intersectionality. For all of you CEOs, whether you're from a medium or small business, and actually that's often where the best practice happens, is small and medium firms. Can I just say, we need to look at a fully universally inclusive corporate culture. Intersectionality is a word that we're hearing a lot of, but that's the most important piece. Integration and intersectionality. If we look at somebody, I'm a woman and I have a disability. So this is where intersectionality needs to come from, and how we do that and break down the silos. The second is in community. Listen, the reason Business in the Community works is because we are here to do this together and to learn. The reason Paul's Imagine works, it's because it's a collective. The reason the Valuable 500 works, because it's a collective community. And that means we have to have safe places. And if we're going to innovate, we're going to make mistakes, and we have to stop cancelling each other out. But very lastly, and the best thing that I can say to anybody is, you don't have to know. You don't have to know what to do, but it is not okay not to do something. And this conversation about we're not doing enough as an excuse not to, or because it's not a priority, is no longer going to wash in this new COVID. So for me, it's a case of creating safe spaces finding targets, but before you find targets, you need to understand your culture. And
Yeah.
I would really encourage us not to use the word pledge.
Okay.
Because pledge is tick boxing, and I encourage us to look at commitment. That is it's just a language thing, but I think that will help us understand the depth of what we're trying to do.
Great. I will take that on board. We'll go back to the drawing board with our name for that, by the way. No, but you're right. I hear you and I'm listening to you. And because fear of failure is a big issue. It's a big issue. So then you don't want to try, because that fear of getting it wrong limits people. And that's why through collaborative effort, it's okay to fail, but it's okay to learn from each other. That's the key thing as well. Paul, just a last quick question for you, but before I finish up with Caroline, what's your last piece of advice to all of our listeners today about why diversity and inclusion matters? Can we finally move the dial on this? Because it's just, we're still ticking boxes, as Caroline said. What do they need to do?
Well, why should you have fear of failure for something that is inclusion of everybody in society? Even if you cannot exactly balance these numbers, you should at least be a leader that creates an inclusive environment. There's 100% correlation between the laws that stack against women in countries all across the world and how bad it is in some, and the economic development. You're not going to win tennis by playing with one hand behind your back. You're not going to win in your companies if you only recruit from 50% or 30% of the world's population. So the barriers to overcome are internal. We have all the tools available to help you to do it. We need to overcome the myth or the unconscious biasness that are out there. People think, for example, that people with disability are more costly to employ, that they're less productive, that they have no loyalty. All the opposite is true. The hard facts are out there. So the question is, do you care? Do you educate yourself? Do you listen to, do you read? Do you find out? Do you talk to people with disabilities? When I put a panel together with people with visual impairment to ask them to apply to Unilever, I was shocked what I heard, because our systems had totally operated from a well-willing, good lens of people that didn't have these problems. But by just reaching out and understanding it, we could make some very simple adjustments and actually were able to attract quite a lot of people with disabilities. And our company was so much better for it. And that is the same for all the other minorities. So at the end of the day, the question is, do you care? It's really the only question. We have the tools. We have people that can help you with the tools and the capabilities and overcome these unconscious biasness that are inside of you and become a whole person. But I have to be honest and frank and tough and direct as a Dutchman. Too often I'm in male-only discussions in the bathroom, or I don't play golf, but I imagine they happen on the golf course. And you just really, these things are not a joke anymore. Especially today, I think we've all discovered that we can only make this world function if we make it function for all. If too many people feel that they are excluded or not participating, the system will ultimately rebel against itself. And frankly, we are at this point. Never ever have we seen, even despite COVID, 50, 60 countries where people are demonstrating in the streets. And if we don't create this inclusive society, you'll see more frustration at the polls. You'll see more populism. You'll see more nationalism. And frankly, you'll see more xenophobia. And I don't want to be responsible for that. And any time that leaders don't act, they become implicit in that game that is currently being played by a minority of people that try to turn it into their advantage at the expense of the majority. The simple question then in the end for you to ask is, are you want to be complicit to that? Or do you want to be responsible for creating this more inclusive, sustainable world? And the one that can answer that question only is you individually.
Paul, thank you so much. Blown away by that inspiration. Caroline, last 30 seconds. Is there anything else you want to say to Irish business leaders out there and your work?
Yeah. For me, it's at your peril or at your loss. Underestimate the power and influence to your bottom line, directly and indirectly, of the 1.3 billion people in the world who have a disability, and with their mother and their father or two people who love them, that's 54% of your consumer base. Or you have the opportunity to leap into that opportunity. And it won't just be for people with disabilities, but it's for your whole business. And I think this is an opportunity to be part of a community that we can grow together. And I also want to say a very big thank you to Irish industry, who supported me for the last 15 years. So yeah, thank you. And let's take this one home.
Oh, Caroline, thank you so much. Let's take that lead together. Thomas, over to you just to close up. But thank you so much.
And just to say, Maura, there are a dozen or more tweetable lines from the last hour. It has been phenomenal. My line is, do you care? And by caring, that doesn't mean you're not looking after your profits, you're not looking after your bottom line, and you're not looking after your long-term interests. So I'm going to leave it there. The first thing I have to do is to thank enormously Anna Leary, Caroline Casey, and Paul Polman for the energy. It's palpable, and the feedback so far has been phenomenal. Great demonstration of leadership this morning. To my colleagues, Lorraine Wall and Maura Horgan, phenomenal work. To our captioner, that has been amazing. I was following her work. She is just amazing. So Maria, thank you very much. And just to leave you with an invitation, it's a long time to go, but 6 October 2021, I sincerely hope you will be joining us. I sincerely hope that Caroline, Anne, and Paul will be coming to Dublin. Hopefully we can have that cup of tea together, and we can really chart the future for the next generation of business leadership in Ireland that will really care. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be safe.
Likewise.